Okay, welcome everyone to the VEF Virtual Series. For those who are joining for the first time, the VEF Virtual Series, guided by the theme Accelerating the Energy Transition, is a sequence of online consultations that explore the pathways that stimulate demand and promote economic recovery in 3 end-use sectors. So this is the 7th session of our industry track, and we will cover inclusive infrastructure development to drive low-carbon industrialization. Now, to begin with today's program, I'm very happy to give the floor to Mr. Tarek M. Taira. He is a director of the Department of Energy here at UNIDO. So we're just letting him in. Hi, Tarek.
Hi, Anna. You hear me well?
Yes, we hear you well. Thank you for joining, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Anna, and welcome to all of you. And good day, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are sitting. On behalf of UNIDO and the Vienna Energy Forum partners, I want to welcome you to the this session of the virtual series. As Anna mentioned, this is part of a long series that has been going on since the fall of last year to explore pathways for decarbonization and integration of renewable energy in key economic sectors. Among them, today's topic is industry. I think the framing of today's session around inclusive infrastructure development to drive low-carbon industrialization is very pertinent, at least here in UNIDO, where we are focusing primarily on inclusive and sustainable industrialization. Our member states, particularly in the emerging and developing countries, have ambitious industrialization plans, and in that context, with the urgency to also tackle the broader challenge that we are facing with climate and mitigating emissions, there always the dilemma: how do we really support and promote industrial growth, and putting that industrial growth also on a low carbon development pathway, if not net zero development pathway. So it is a challenge, and we would like to use the opportunity today to explore different dimensions of this dilemma or this challenge. As with these virtual discussions, we in terms of the structure, we will have a keynote presentation to set the scene and provide maybe insights into particular areas. Then we will have the opportunity to join breakout discussions. Today we have 2 breakout discussions, one on global perspectives, where we are joined by experts from the World Bank, REN 21, Sun Funder, and NRL and UNEP. And the second breakout session brings country perspectives, where we're joined by representatives from Austria, South Africa, Kenya, and the UK. So you're invited to join any of the breakout sessions. After the breakout sessions, we'd like to invite the moderators of the breakout sessions to the plenary, and you're all invited to the plenary for a debriefing on the takeaways from the discussion. So moving into our keynote presentation today, joining us key expert, Mr. Sarbinder Singh from P4G, or Partnership for Green Growth, and Ms. Gail Klimtworth from Systemic. Not to take too much, I want to invite our keynote presentation presenters to the stage. Let me start with Mr. Sarbinder Singh. Mr. Sarbinder also brings, he is also the Director of Investment at P4G, as I mentioned, but also brings a very rich experience in managing investments or investment portfolios in the energy infrastructure. So with that, the floor is yours, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Tariq. I've got a short presentation. I'm just trying to find out a way to actually share it. Just give me a second and I think it should be there. So thanks, Tariq. It's a great opportunity to speak on the UNIDO Forum. I'll start with a brief introduction of P4G and what we are doing, and some of our actions will be further elaborated. The work we have done on industrial zones by our partnership, SSEZ Africa, and Gail will be talking in more detail about that. So what P4G is about, we are a Danish, Dutch, and Korean funded organization hosted by WRI. We have got operations in 12 countries where we got national platforms, 3 in LATAM region, 3 in Africa, and 3 countries in Asia region. And when I say that, we are operating out of those regions, we got national platforms set up in these countries where there's a representation from government and private sector. Government primarily provide a support, on policy and regulation, and private sector provides support for market access. And in addition, we do have national platforms in Denmark, Netherlands, and Korea, who are our funding countries. We work in 5 SDG areas, which includes zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, and circular economy. So far, we've got more than 50 partnerships. I'll call it multi-stakeholder partnerships that we have funded at startup level and the scale-up level. And some of those partnerships have now matured into sustainable business propositions. That means either they have achieved financial closures and operating business as usual, or they're almost there. Almost $292 million we have catalyzed investment into physical assets or in those corporations or companies and partnerships. The impact so far has been 110,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions reduction. On the ground, 500,000 individuals affected. We're not alone in this. We've got organization partners, which include C40 cities, GGI, IFC, World Economic Forum, and of course, WRI is our host and also the knowledge partner. And that's how we get strength to do what we are trying to do. In terms of the approach we have taken is that there are lots of innovative business proposition in terms of mostly in the public-private partnership space. We work with them, we provide them startup funding and the scale-up funding. And funding is just one part of it. We have created a global ecosystem through our country-level national platforms who provide support to these partnerships. And these partnerships are very much aligned to their NDC goals. And while working with them, our objective is that each of these partnerships mature into a business proposition. And the institutional investors can come and invest in. These partnerships definitely have high risk. Sometimes we land with a blended finance solution, sometimes, institutional investors, and even the private investors, they come and invest in these. So that's the whole work we are doing. We, strive to become part of the global investment value chain. So it's not about just providing funding. We want, as I said earlier, to mature these partnerships into something which is not just producing impact in a given space or given time as a project implementation, but what they do will remain. This is our business model. Again, as I said earlier, startup and scale-up funding, creating deal flow where all the institutional investors can come and start investing in. But that's only one part. That's not, providing money is not a success. The success comes where on the bottom side of it, where we talk about, we start working with these partnerships at the origination level, we co-create with them so that the right proposition is on the table. And in addition, then we provide them acceleration and advisory support, very strategic, wherever it is required, and to the selected partnerships, not all. We do have thematic integration, because 50 partnerships managing by a small team is not something, it's a huge challenge. And the way we do it is that we got some 4 themes and we try to bundle those partnerships there and accordingly provide that support. Then these partnerships are supported through the national platforms where we've got political support, we've got government support, we got private support mobilized for this partnership. And then we also do the high-level network convening. We have got an upcoming event in Korea towards the end of May, where several of these partnerships we've branded, and it's a multi-country event hosted by the Korean government. Now, here comes one of the examples I wanted to share in the context of work we are doing. So we funded SSEZ or SIC partnership a couple of years ago. We provided 2 rounds of funding with an objective that they will develop sustainable special economic zones or sustainable industrial clusters. So very low carbon footprint, almost negligible, and also, like low waste, waste from one industry being utilized as a raw material for another industry. So with that kind of concept, we funded this partnership. The partnership has already developed the first zone in Nigeria. And when I say develop, that means, achieving a financial closure. The construction goes after that. The second zone they're working on is more agro-based, and that is in Kenya. These zones, together are going to create jobs for tens of thousands of people, directly and indirectly. But that's where, what I would say is our initial success. And that's where, scale up of this success is very critical. It's done in now 2 countries. We'd like to do it in like every country in Africa, but our capital is not, we don't have sufficient capital. So we are also now exploring that how do we scale up and replicate? And the key success factor, how this partnership achieves successes, is that availability of initial capital, risk tolerant capital. We provide grants, so it's very much risk tolerant. But what we are now working on is that how to remove that barrier. How can we fund not just 2 zones, but maybe 50 zones, 10 zones, 20 zones, and the impact can be taken like throughout the Africa, not just to like a couple of countries. So that's one thing. The second thing is like our ecosystem that has been successful, and they have seen the benefit. So within their own countries, they want to develop more zones. And this is how we are trying to unlock as we work. I mean, as we see, more interest in this, we will codify our success. We will try to see, how we can work with other financial institutions to provide some blended solution in near future, so that we can scale the success just beyond 1 partnership, 2 zones, to multiple partnerships, and tens of zones or maybe 50 zones in next decade. I mean, that's the ambition we're working with this partnership. Now, in terms of thematic areas, so as I said, like that is 1 partnership out of 50, but very successful partnership. It has been already spun off into a separate business, supported by other financial institutions, including Infraco Africa. We got these 4 thematic areas in which we're working. Energy transition, which does cover a wide range of sectors, including one side is zero emissions mobility, and on the other side, renewable energy, net zero buildings, smart cities, distributed renewable energy, efficient energy and energy efficiency. We are also working on green hydrogen economy, primarily right now with Chile, but hope to expand that portfolio in other countries as well, other P4G countries as well. Food and agriculture value chain, that's another area of work we are pursuing, and we've got quite a few partnerships who are getting now closer to the maturity. Zero waste green industry, this is where this particular partnership falls. Not only that we're talking about sustainable special economic zones or the sustainable industrial clusters, we are also talking about the plastics, how to recover, how to recycle and repurpose the waste which is generated in cities and countries. As part of that, we're also talking about the commercial food, industrial and commercial food loss and waste. The last one, but the not least one, digital solutions for water. So that's one sector, again, I'm very hopeful that towards the end of this year, we'll be able to share some, tremendous successes there as well. And there's a lot of work going on, and we have funded partnerships in this area in Africa region. So in overall, I mean, this slide shows like how many partnerships we have funded over the last 3 years. We are into next round of funding right now as we speak. Just opened our call for partnership process for accepting new partnerships for this year. This is, a bit of high level of our governance. We are guided by our board of directors, that includes political leadership from various countries, that also include the institutional and the civil society leadership, and also private sector leadership from various well-known organizations. This is, our small leadership team that is pursuing this. We got, as I said, working out of different regions. And that's in short, I'll say about P4G and, our partnership.
Thank you, Sarbinder. Thank you very much for also bringing the dimension of partnerships into developing these kind of solutions around infrastructure elements and also aggregating demand and supply in the context of industrial parks as a way for developing countries and countries that are on the path to create industrial clusters to also create the conditions for this kind of financing schemes, considering that also the investment typically historically has happened through public finance. Now we're looking at a much more diverse model of financing infrastructure for productive activities for industries with both the dimension of ensuring that it's sustainable, but also financially viable in the context of emerging and developing countries. Let me move to the second part of the presentation from Ms. Gail Clintworth, a special advisor at Systemic. Systemic is a think and do tank that is also trying to bring disruptive solutions to on the path to sustainable development. But also Ms. Gail is on the board of several important organizations, the Shell Foundation and Global Scan, if I understand correctly. So thank you for joining us. The floor is yours, Ms. Gail.
Super. Thank you, Tariq, and thank you, Sabi, for two things. First of all, for being there and being a great partner, and secondly, for giving us grants so that we could actually do this work. So thank you. What I'd like to just share just very briefly. So my background has been in corporate all of my life. I was Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever. Previously, I was with financial services on an executive team. And I think I got a little bit tired of just producing reports and doing very large events. And I decided that before I hang up my boots one day, I want to see some of these things happen. And so the idea around sustainable investment clusters really came to mind as a place in which we can actually bring these ideas to play, particularly in emerging markets. And I started in Africa because you'll hear I'm South African, so that's where I'm from. I'm going to share a quick video, if I can find it right now. Just 1 second. There we go. So, as I said, one of the really great things that that P4G is enabled is, first of all, out of Systemic for us to develop the SAVO project development developers business, which is really going around in emerging markets and looking for great opportunities with wonderful industrial parks or pieces of land linked to visionary leaders who understand the need to transition both energy and their business model so that we'll create sustainable industrialization more broadly. I'm going to just very quickly talk about what I mean by sustainable investment clusters, and then just give you 3 examples that we're working through. So first of all, when we talk in industrial parks or special economic zones or processing zones or free ports, everyone's got a different view about them, often focused on the tax angle. In our term of industrial clusters, really what we're talking about is anywhere you can aggregate industries. And those aggregated industries will generally have some kind of industrial purpose. You know, there are economic zones that don't have that, but in our case, some kind of industrial cluster. I think the most important point to note is that there are 5,000 existing industrial clusters in the world. That's 5,000. It's almost as many towns as in the world. And there's another 500 planned, right? That means that we have a petri dish of at least 5,500 of these places where we can test the economic, inclusive, sustainable industrialization around the world. And yet, if you have a look at them, 47% of them just aren't working because they're underutilized. Many are criticized because they're not really part of the local economy, and many have negative social and environmental impacts. We believe that by going and transforming this, and it's not only we, because I know UNIDO is very actively involved in this, I know GGI is actively involved in this, is that if we go and actually transform these, we believe that we can have responsible business activity around manufacturing and trading. We can really start this transition without necessarily having to convince the government to move off of fossil fuels for their total grid, and that we can use digitally enhanced tools. So that is really what we have been doing. And I'm going to share these 3 examples. So the first one that Sabi mentioned that we started working with was the Ladle Special Economic Zone in Nigeria. Now, Ladle, currently, it's an enclave off of the coast of Apapa in Nigeria. For those of you that know Nigeria, there are 2 issues. The one is obviously energy is not necessarily, well, first of all, it's expensive, and secondly, it's not reliable. But also anything that happens around the ports in Nigeria is not necessarily the most efficient. And so there's a huge amount of congestion. The Ladle zone was initially developed as a service to oil and gas, offshore drilling wells, and they would move the materials backwards and forwards. We got involved with a very visionary leader, and this is where I'm going to make the point of visionary leaders being absolutely critical, who understood the need to transition not only her zone, but also the Nigerian economy to inclusive, sustainable industrialization. And we've been working with her, first of all, to basically change the layout of the zone, secondly, to change the energy mix, and thirdly, to change the tenant mix. The really amazing point that I want to make here is that currently she works purely with diesel, right? And the reason she works purely with diesel is because it's reliable. In fact, we have now, so that when Sabi mentioned, you know, we closed investment, we've closed investment around an LNG facility. That has brought the cost of the diesel down from of the electricity down from 30 to 40 cents per kilowatt, now down to 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt. And we are also now in the process of bringing in a cashew facility, which is going to do dehusking of cashews on the ground, as well as some other agricultural processing, the waste of which is going to go into some kind of biofuel support mechanism. And so, you know, I think the key point to make here is we have a special economic zone that was set up for oil and gas. By working with it and a visionary leader, we have been able to both reduce the energy cost and create a much more inclusive economy within it. And hopefully also create something that is a sign for others in Nigeria of what's possible. We're also working then in Kenya. Our project there is the Oserian Two Lakes Industrial Park. It's a 150-hectare development on the banks of Lake Naivasha. And there, because it is on a geothermal energy source, we are using the benefits of Oserian's geothermal support and water access to bring in vision-aligned tenants and investors to create a demonstration case for sustainable industrialization in Kenya. The way, and those of you that are familiar with circular economy will understand this, the way it works is we're bringing in agro and food processing, light manufacturing, sustainable textiles, responsible forestry processing, and all linked through logistics services. We're using geothermal to trap the heat that will service a number of these particular industries, as well as other energy sources that together can keep consistent energy supply. The reason why these different renewable energy technologies work is because our mini grid is suitable for industry, because we've integrated solar and geothermal into the grid. And again, an example, I guess, of a captive power system that enables us to really shift what is currently, well, it's geothermal, which is good, but was currently in the environment, a fossil fuel driven grid. All right, and the third one I want to talk about is slightly different to a special economic zone, but on the coast of Kenya, we're developing a regenerative town and productive landscape across 300 hectares in somewhere called Kilifi. And the idea there around a regenerative town is not only are we going to bring in, for example, a responsible forestry business that is creating inclusive development, but also we're going to bring in affordable housing. We're going to bring in some very interesting new ideas of how one can create an oceans economy. But most importantly, we are also going to develop a solar-driven desalination opportunity, so that we can in fact begin to supply to the neighboring communities. So, you know, if we have a look at this area of Kenya, and more broadly, there's about 1 million people living below the poverty line. Only 63% have access to potable water, and that's a statistic. But if you go there, you'll realize, like, they don't have it at all, because, you know, tanks come every now and then, and only 17% have access to grid electricity. So with this integrated project that is driven by, in essence, a sustainable investment cluster, we're going to be able to create an anchor that will provide subsidized renewable power and water. So what's the issue? If all of this works so beautifully, what's the issue? And it's a little bit what Sabi was referring to earlier. So why did we need P4G as a grant? Because upfront, and each of these projects are driven by a visionary business leader, right? Each of these projects requires some kind of preparation. So, you know, the project developer is going to do the feasibility studies, the business model, and contract in master plans, etc. Someone's got to pay for that, right? It's fine in really big government projects, but actually many of these aren't big government projects. So we need some kind of funding to help that. And then the second point, and we know this, is that for energy transition or any kind of transition, right, there's some upfront investment before one starts to get the benefits. And so there's the chicken and egg financing. And we believe that it's really important, I think, for the world to begin to understand that it's great to talk about the great you know, transition commitments and net zero, et cetera, but not only for really, really large government-driven projects, but for, I guess, medium-sized companies and developments on the ground. We need to find a way to help them to transition. There's a lot more information and knowledge we have, and thanks to SAVO and UNIDO and GGI and P4G, we've developed this into a knowledge product, and you can find details of that and a great deal more information. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, and also to Sarbinder, for both of you for setting the scene with what I would really call visionary ideas and partnerships exactly around this intersection of infrastructure, industrialization or industrial development, and innovation in the broader sense. And we know for a fact that many developing countries are pursuing a path to industrialization through looking at clustering parks and specialized industrial zones, especially in the African continent. And it remains essential that how do we really tackle the infrastructure elements in a sustainable way? And I think your scene-setting sort of innovations opens the space for a number of questions that I hope we can bring to the two round tables or the breakout sessions, because essentially, okay, how do we scale up these kind of pilots? And one other thing that Gail raised also on the upfront cost, how do we deal with this? What kind of partnerships we can bring to offset this upfront cost and bring it affordable? How do we differentiate and bring complementarity between the role of the government as custodian of providing adequate infrastructure and opening the space for private visionary leaders to create alternative scenarios around industrial parks? So these are very important questions. I hope we can sort of bring them to the two-round breakout sessions. So with this, we can sort of conclude our plenary segment. I invite you to join one of the two plenary one of the two breakout sessions, Global Perspectives and Country Voices. We convene all of us back here in 45 minutes for takeaway from the discussion. With this, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tariq.
Well, now that we're all here, let's get started, because we have 45 minutes, which is not a lot. But I mean, the scene has been set, so I'll not go into that again. What I really would like to achieve is that we use the common and diversified knowledge that we have in this group to see if we can advance our thinking and our ideas and maybe come up with starts of solutions. And for that we have three questions that will go around this group. And time allowing, I would also like to see if there are questions coming from the audience that we could put in front of the group. But maybe for practical guidance, I will follow the order that is in the bios. So I will use that sequence to go from panelist to panelist. And before we go into the actual questions, I would like to give each of you the opportunity 1 to 2 minutes to maybe very briefly explain what you are doing, and especially in relation to the topic that we are discussing, right? The challenge, as it has been mentioned. How can energy, transport, ICT, how can we make sure that that helps accelerate and scale up the development impact? So let's do a quick round, and then we go into the questions, and I'm really looking forward to it. And Etienne, I'll start with you, please.
Thank you, Shishan. I work for the World Bank Group within a team called Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation, and I lead an area of work called Green Competitiveness. It's important because there are other teams that deal with energy and environment, but we are looking at the agenda from more or less a business perspective and how we can actually use to kickstart economic growth and job creation in developing countries that work on topics related to eco-industrial parks, a lot with UNIDO and GIZ, and I also deal with industrial energy efficiency, standards and labeling programs, and resilience of industries as well. So a bit of a broad spectrum of whatever touches industries. We're involved in helping out with other teams in the World Bank. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Etienne, and thanks a lot for that link to that publication that you shared. I hadn't seen it, but it looks very interesting. Thanks a lot for that. Nico, over to you, please.
Hi everyone, yes, Nico Taibji. I work for Sun Funder. We're a financier for mainly distributed solar projects in emerging markets. Most of our team is based in Nairobi. We've closed about $150 million for solar in more than 20 countries, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. We started off really addressing off-grid solar projects, so the emerging kind of small solutions for residential applications, but increasingly have been moving into more commercial and industrial projects, which is why I guess I'm part of this discussion, and other kinds of productive uses related more to local and national economies. Just to say that the other side of our business essentially is that now we source that capital, and that's all through blended finance vehicles. So the investors in our funds are DFIs, but also private capital, largely impact oriented, but also some kind of truly private, if you like. And where we are now is our investments have directly impacted about 8 million people with improved energy access and around 750,000 tons of carbon mitigated.
Thank you, Nico. Moving to the next one from Paris, Rana, please.
Hey everybody, so my name is Rana. I'm from working at Rentin One, the Renewable Energy Pulse Network for the 21st century. Very happy to be here again. What are we doing as Rentin One, maybe specifically on this topic? To be honest, specifically on this topic, not lots. We try, however, to give this topic a much bigger visibility when it comes to really assessing where things are developing on the renewable energy side. And I think this is where it's really interesting. So what we are doing is, so we're a community of players from governments, NGOs, industry associations, and research and academia, and we provide information and data to inform decision makers. Now, we heard before Gail saying like, I really wanted to stop doing reports, and I can completely understand her. The reality is, however, that reports is also an entry point to make things visible. And I would say very often when we're thinking about industrialization and renewable energy and industrial processes, we think about the big players. We think about steel and cement, etc. SME work are, I think, 70% or 80%, a really high amount of energy consumers is basically in the SME space. So I think from our side, we feel that it's really important to broaden the discussion about the role of renewable energy in industries, not only focusing on the high energy consumers, but also the mainstream industry, and then be creative also about the leverage points. Obviously, finance is super important. But another topic clearly is also when we're looking into ESG, the supply sides and the link also of international players and SMEs. That's really something where, as Rentin One, we feel we're really interested in exploring also ways of bridging these ecosystems, which still operate a bit, I would not say in isolation, but in shy collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, Rana. And I mean, we were moving already into the topic, and that's good. And I hope we can do more of that, because the discussion is focused a little bit in the scene setting on industrial zones and maybe the larger companies, but the discussion is not restricted to that, right? We also have the SMEs, we also have urban systems, and the integration of all of that. So definitely, I hope we can push on that a bit more in the discussion. Ben, over to you, please.
Thanks, Mark. Benjamin Hickman from UNEP's Paris office, sit in the energy branch. I work on 3 public-private partnerships that UNEP manages globally and the implementation activities they have. So one's the District Energy in Cities initiative, which is really focused on district heating, district cooling for industries and also for cities. The second one is our Integrated Urban Systems Partnership, which is looking to bring some of the best practices around energy master planning and integrated urban systems, such as linking wastewater heat from wastewater systems to provide heating for buildings, or capturing waste heat from industries, and also sharing through power through mini grids, as was mentioned in the plenary. And the third one is the COOL Coalition, which is a global multi-stakeholder partnership. And under that, I'm supporting our work on cooling as a service model, which is quite relevant, I think, for this industry discussion, and also cold chain, which is a new area that UNEP's building up support on in implementation, especially at the rural level, where there's a lot of gap in the cold chain in the global south. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks a lot. Bethany, over to you.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Yeah, Bethany Spear, I'm a senior researcher at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, sitting in Denver, Colorado. I basically help lead or coordinate most of our international efforts that are focused around mobilizing private sector investment, private sector engagement, and those types of efforts. One of the key projects that I'll be speaking to today is the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, which is a public-private partnership that we co-lead together with allotrope partners and the World Resources Institute. And this initiative, called the CEIA for short, is supported by P4G and the US State Department and others. But the point of it is to really decarbonize manufacturing as well as other sectors in industry and commerce. And to do that through what we call the 3 Ps, so policy, purchasers, and pipeline. So on the policy side of things, really engaging with governments and utilities to improve enabling environments, open up new procurement options. And then on the purchaser side of things, so convening groups of buyers to really demonstrate the scale of clean energy demand. And this is all focused on emerging markets, so places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Colombia, Mexico. And then on the pipeline side of things, really working with industry to identify projects and ideally utilize innovative approaches. How can we aggregate projects across brands to really reach scale? So, and the purpose of all this work is to really help these companies as well as countries to meet their mutual climate goals.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bethany. So now we all know where we are coming from. So I'll move straight into the first question towards Etienne. So what are the barriers and opportunities for the adoption of a low carbon infrastructure at a large scale? In industry, we heard from Sabi, partnerships is key, especially when it comes to industrial zones, and then financing and business propositions basically come almost from themselves. Is that the key, or are there other both barriers and opportunities that we have to look at? Etienne, please.
No, thank you, Mark, for that question. And then I also, again, I talk mostly for the industrial parks, and I do acknowledge, as Rana mentioned, this SME area is a bit of a tricky thing, especially with COVID-19 and the SME sector being at the forefront of the recovery process. We're starting to really look back into how can we scale the work in the SME sector, and I think that's going to be a challenge just because they're quite spread out. They are a lot of times lack the capital, lack the knowledge and other managerial or even process skills, right? That we can't reach so easily. So I think that is a topic we need to kind of tackle better. On the barriers, on the more overall, it's a lot of times park management as well. And I think we put a lot of credit on capital, but capital at times, before the pandemic, at least from the bank perspective, there was enough out there, right? There's enough capital out there to kind of build the base infrastructure. And even if done correctly, you can make a case for the renewables. But what we found is that let's say, for example, in Bangladesh, we we couldn't get the government to have a unit in place to manage all these great ideas that we had, right? So we provided them with a $500 million loan to develop an eco-industrial park, but we had to at the same time make sure that their capacity is in place to really manage all that infrastructure. There we've helped them develop floating solar, for example, right? Or we're in the process of developing the floating solar, because in all the industrial parks in Bangladesh, you will have a small lake, an investor lake, they call it, in the middle of the park. And we said, why waste that space? Space is very rare in the country. Let's see how we can install 10 megawatts worth of floating solar. Same with ground mounted. We did about 80 megawatts. We're looking at about 80 megawatts at the moment. And again, it's the capital from the private sector is for let's say a PPP even, from that perspective, it's very hard to implement. So what we're trying to do now is at least start the process on the bank side and on the government side, and then see if the private sector is willing to come in a later stage to help manage and execute that infrastructure. So from that perspective, the barriers are a lot of times just operational. The financing, I think, requires a bit more patience from the operator and developer of these industrial parks, and awareness, because when we came in, they were just doing basic infrastructure. And our team kind of went in, did the pre-feasibility analysis on potential integration of renewables. We realized that there's a steam company setting up right next to industrial parks. So we worked on developing a potential steam network to the textile companies. So all these things do require a bit of awareness raising as well. So I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of these kinds of activities. And this does require research and awareness building. And here I'm not covering the traditional stuff like carbon pricing, and here I'm just or feed-in tariffs. I'm just covering what we see on the industrial park side. I think there's huge opportunities. I think the graph that Systemic showed on the number of industrial parks, which I think UNCTAD had at over 5,000 actually, is quite a number. And we did, the report that I shared, we only found about 420 globally that are doing some sort of eco measure. And 50% of those were related to solar. So you can just imagine what the potential is when you do scale that up, and help build that out. We also saw that only 17% of these parks are in non-OECD countries. So what we sense is there's a trend going on, and there's a lack of awareness or capability of implementing that trend in some of the countries where we work and operate. So I think that's maybe playing around with, at least looking at some of the barriers that we've experienced in the countries I work. But I think I can go into more details, in further questions. So thank you, Mark.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Etienne. I think that brings us smoothly into, well, I hope also maybe Nico's intervention. Do you see experience from your side, same barriers? Solar was mentioned a few times, or can you add to that or refine that? Nico, over to you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks. No, solar is clearly a bit of a theme, and that's great. I won't elaborate too much more on the opportunity there. Just to say, we of course see that very much in emerging markets, and to reinforce the point that this is not driven by subsidy, it's driven by economics and reliability, which of course increases the economic case. There was some research by Bloomberg New Energy Finance that looks at 15 African countries and saw that on-site, solar plus storage generation was cheaper than the grid in more than half of those countries. So that we do see that sort of transformation being driven by the fundamentals. The problem, of course, is the bottlenecks, the challenges. Absolutely agree with those observed already. On the SME front, maybe I can speak more to that, because that tends to be more the kind of off-takers we'd be looking at, or the developers we work with are looking at. And so, yes, you've got small, fragmented projects, portfolios. You've got the problem of relatively small markets. So how do you build sizable enough project portfolios to make this really interesting and to bring your costs down overall, etc. We've seen really interesting solutions from some of the pioneers in different African countries. Examples would be very standardized product offerings. So a company we work with, Daystar Power in Nigeria, really sort of has done a great job cracking that nut by finding similar kinds of commercial industrial rooftops and off-takers, having very standardized approaches to the project design, but also the contracting, being able to bring costs further down there. There are issues around enabling environment, and again, this is not a subsidy per se, but this could be on different kinds of licensing regimes. There's a lot of work still to be done there, and hand in hand with governments and regulators. And that just speaks to the kind of the way that the market can increase overall. On the financing side, I would agree there is now a lot of capital. I mean, peer lenders that we see in the kind of markets we're working in are launching C&I specific solar funds now, and the issue really is more on bankable pipeline. I would say there is an issue of not enough local capital, particularly important for kind of currency issues. There's also the question of how developers and financiers of their project portfolios interact with existing local banks and their financing relationships with industry. So, an interesting problem that we have to overcome is if the existing banking relationship has encumbered the assets upon which we might be looking to install the solar. That is just a kind of very practical and can be a very long-winded process to unpick. One of the solutions there is really working with the local financial sector to understand the scale of that opportunity, and really they could be extending those existing banking relationships to build out those kind of renewable projects.
Thanks a lot, Nico, for this, and maybe in the next intervention, if possible, I'd be interested to hear more about these standard offerings that you mentioned from, I believe it was Nigeria. There's also a question in the chat on the balancing of the power production. If anyone wants to have it a go in the chat, maybe primarily to answer, feel free. Otherwise, we can also try to take it up in the discussion if time allows. But let me now move to Ghana. I mean, we had two interventions with a focus on industrial zones in a way, also touching on SMEs a few times. Maybe you want to take it from a different perspective, Ghana, as you wish. To bring another angle to this. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm going to take it from another angle, but I think on the question with regard to, I'm happy to answer the question on the reliability of the power source. And I think even the way it is formulated shows that there are still myths out there on the technical feasibility of providing a 24/7 power supply or heat supply or cooling supply building on efficient and renewable energy solutions. And I think this is probably also echoing to some extent what Etienne mentioned in terms of awareness. The technological solutions are there. And there is not only one way, basically, of addressing it. It will depend very much on, are we in an off-grid space, in which case you would rather complement with a battery. When you're mini-grids, the wind and solar PV can be complementary. You can produce storage activities, complement with dispatchable renewable energy. And I think especially when we are speaking about industrial zones, there is often waste generation, which allows to produce bioenergy. There are lots of possibilities on bringing together, again, especially in industrial zones also, but also in industrial application itself, between heating, cooling, and electricity supply. I think it's not about the feasibility. It's not about reliability. The reality is, however, that what is needed here is to have a good analysis, and this is where data comes in again, and not only focusing on the electricity supply, but broader, what does the energy need? What is the energy supply? So having good analysis of these needs, but also bringing players together. And I think this is very much where I would like to build upon, because I think so it was interesting, Etienne's feedback, but also Nico's feedback on finance is there in both cases, but the challenging situation is also how do we implement this? How do we make it happen? And we're talking about transitions here, which go far beyond the transition of moving from one energy source to another energy source. We are also speaking about transitions which are more fundamental and require capacity building, which require workforce preparation, which require new ways of standardizing services, products, collaboration between players. And this is something where I think we collectively, at least that's what we're observing, we collectively come to an agreement that this is something which is required. But what we probably collectively as communities need to do here is to develop the soft skills which are needed to really decide how we need to make this happen. Because we speak about energy, but if you ask the 6 of us what we associate with energy, we'll think about very different things. And when you ask in bridging electricity, heating, cooling, somebody from steel who has high temperature needs, and somebody who'll work on, from the agriculture sector, let's say, on low temperature needs, the associations will be different. And we need to bridge this if we're really thinking about building basically a 24/7 energy supply, which is building on efficiency and renewable energy. And I think this really echoes this part of awareness raising, but also capacity building on building basically and workforce preparation beyond just the technical skills. So it's decision makers in finance, it's decision makers in governments, it's decision makers in industries, it's decision makers in the urban. So we just recently produced a Renewables and Cities Global Status Report. The reality is much of the leverages here is also at the subnational level. And as a result, and the citizens can also play a big role when we're speaking even about renewable energy in industries, because this is also creating opportunities for jobs. So yeah, I would just like to broaden the discussion in that sense, not only on the tech and hard skills, but broaden it to soft skills.
Yeah. Thank you, Rana. And I mean, I'm surprised, but positively surprised in a way that we hear so much focus on the soft side of the things, how important that is. So that's good. That's already a takeaway. And you also give me a smooth handover towards Ben. I think when talking about energy is not just power, is also heating and cooling and is also cities and subnational level. And maybe Ben, I don't know if you want to take it from that angle alone, but that could be one option to add to the discussion. Over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, no, I think the question as it is, there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of opportunities. In our implementation work and also sort of UNEP's awareness raising role, I think one of the big challenges is breaking the myths around, sharing something like heating with your neighboring industry or sharing cooling with your neighboring industry. It's a really hard concept for industries or buildings to get over. So there's a huge amount of awareness raising that we've been doing in countries and continue to do. And the servitization model which comes from that it's not an easy step to take. If you're burning your own coal to, in your small textile industry unit, going from that to, a steam network is a huge jump in confidence that you need there. So that awareness raising and explaining and batting away these myths is super important. And I wanted to come, I think it was Etienne mentioned it, and it's first, but everyone has said it, this capacity building is so crucial. I mean, coming up with an amazing technical idea of how to integrate all the systems and which everyone on this panel can understand, and actually translating that into implementation is extremely difficult. And I think we need to build up the capacity of the policymakers that are, sanctioning these industrial zones. So in India, for example, we're working with Ministry of Environment on their EIA process to see, okay, how can under the EIA process you start to look at requiring industrial units to do this kind of energy planning properly, or to look at district cooling or district heating, and at least give it the shot through a feasibility assessment. So building up the capacity of national stakeholders, and as Rana was saying, a lot of these industry units, they're peri-urban, they might fall under municipal jurisdictions, building up the capacity of cities to look at and identify these opportunities for sharing energy or applying the city's planning authority onto an industrial zone they might have. That's a huge area of work as well. There's I think opportunities that we are identifying, which we're working on already. I think offtake of waste heat is a huge opportunity, both like high temperature waste heat and sharing that with lower temperature industries or buildings. That's a huge opportunity, and we're also looking at free cooling as well. So LNG regas terminals, how can the free cooling from them benefit local cold chain, cold storages, refrigerated warehouses in the area? So there's all these opportunities, but again, yeah, the barrier is the capacity, I think, to deliver that, and the policy framework that also lets you sell cooling from one place to another, or heating. We're also, I think, really pushing that, we don't try to overly electrify industry when there's all of these thermal level opportunities to be had. We've got huge levels of electricity demand growing in cities from transport, from cooling. I think if as much as we can keep industry on thermal and share cooling, share heating, share waste heat, the easier it will be to decarbonize the power system. That's not to say they don't need power. That power should be decarbonized, but a large amount of what they need is heat and cooling. Yeah, I'll stop there, and happy to discuss more. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Ben, and that's great. I mean, the importance of heating and cooling in the whole discussion is important, right? I also see the chat going wild, and that's great. But there was a question on power planning, I believe. But you have to look at the whole thing, right? The whole energy is not just power, so definitely something to bear in mind. Ben, also some of these examples that you mentioned, I might want to hear more on that later, the free cooling or some of the others. But let me first go to Bethany. We've had a lot already. I'm not going to say anything on what angle you want to take it from, but feel free to add or complement or refine any of the statements.
Yeah,
over to you.
Yeah, so many great comments made so far. I guess kind of building off of some of the points that Ben made and others, but going back to generation. So a couple of ideas around kind of offtake agreements and kind of setting those enabling environments, and then also maybe a practical example about how we're trying to build capacity through the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator. So I think, on the electricity generation side of things, there's still a lot of unmet potential there. And, for industrial customers, on-site solar, can really only provide a small portion of their energy needs. It's an important option, and it's a really good starting place, but maybe it's 20%, 50%. I mean, the number is going to depend on a lot of different factors, roof and ground space, energy demand profile, solar resources, efficiency of the solar panels. But really, in order to meet a higher portion of industry's demand for electricity anyway, they're going to need some off-site procurement options. And these just really aren't available in a lot of emerging markets. They're sort of on the horizon in a few areas, but largely they're absent. So that's really a key barrier that we're seeing. So, how can we work with governments, ministries of energy? How can we also work with utilities? Because a lot of times in these markets that we're working in, the utilities are state-owned, monopoly or quasi, monopoly enterprises. So we really want to see, like, how can we also bring them into the picture to really be active participants in this? So maybe it's green tariffs or green utility pricing programs. We worked really closely with PLN in Indonesia to help them set up renewable energy certificate option for corporate buyers there. So, I think these are really important, but, we have to have the full variety, different menu of options for corporates and industrials. Like, they really want to see different options to meet different energy needs. So if it's, virtual power purchase agreements that are sort of, financial contracts, or direct and physical power purchase agreements, virtual net metering, community solar, I think there's really a variety of options that they want to see. So I think we should keep working together to push the boundaries there. And then in terms of one of the opportunities that we see under the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, it's really, again, kind of going back to this purchaser engagement and doing that aggregated procurements. So we've been piloting these in several of our markets, especially in Colombia, Mexico, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So we're looking at different ways to bring together groups of buyers, sometimes engaging with industrial associations, sometimes developing our own consortia of, sometimes it's brands and supply chains, multiple brands and multiple supply chains together. But really, how can we pool these projects together and add value there and really kind of kickstart markets further? So, these pools really provide a lot of different values. They, reduce the risk to the developer, because we're helping with some of the pre-feasibility and, identifying viable sites. We're also helping to lower costs for the end user, because the developer, the winning bidder can really, buy products in bulk, and we're also lowering some of the soft costs in terms of obtaining customers. So this helps, for those markets, especially where prices are on the margin, or there's just a lack of familiarity, even if prices are competitive for solar compared to the grid, helps bring those costs down and make it even more interesting to the corporate buyers. And, through this process, we're developing, no-cost templates, guidebooks, financial screening tools. So these are all available on our website, and that's kind of the capacity building element. So working closely with these industrial buyers throughout the process. So, hey, they can do this, they get experience doing this for one site, but then they can really scale and do this for additional sites on their own, and, sharing these experiences through our working groups, so that other industrial buyers see, like, hey, this is actually a viable business model. This other company did it. We can do it. We have these free tools available to us.
Thanks, Bethany. Already very interesting points. I'd like to hear more maybe later on your mentioning of aggregated procurement. I imagine it's procuring power together, but maybe it's also materials. I'm not sure, but as a possible business model, definitely very interesting. And we're moving into that now as our second round of interventions on examples, but many of you have already touched on extremely interesting examples. So feel free to elaborate on that, and also in a way try to describe them as what is also their scale-up potential, right? Or not, or how can it? How might a certain approach not have worked is also meaningful information potentially. But if you can focus on one or two examples that have worked or not worked, but at least given important information for the way forward. That would be great. And I'll start again with you, Etienne, please.
I spoke briefly about the Bangladesh example, and we have about three lending operations in the past 2 years of about $1 billion on these industrial parks. So the example of Bangladesh, what we felt worked really well is understanding the local context, and it's a huge zone. It's 20,000 hectares in the south of the country. They're looking at a new way of industrialization that is much more green. Is to focus on the demand, right? And when we spoke to the investors, we had a sense that they wanted a more green turnkey investment area. So you just click in, you don't have to worry about the renewable energies that need to be put in place. The zone does that for you, the wastewater treatment facilities, the desalination plant, all these things are already something that the investor no longer has to worry about. They don't have to excuse things to H&M and CNA and all the other textile investors. They have a space that is very conducive to them. So we started with the demand. We translated the demand and aggregated the demand and tried to see what we can do in order to help using really financial viable options, because the Bangladeshi clients are very sharp and they knew exactly the financials. So we had to go with them with numbers, and that means maybe reports as well, because sometimes there's a lack of understanding of what the entire world is doing in this area of infrastructure or decarbonization industrial infrastructure. So giving them ideas and thoughts was very effective. I think also in Bangladesh, what is very important for us to remember, and I think from my experience in industrial energy efficiency, and back maybe to this SME question, is that industries will not do anything that is not going to make them profits, create markets, and make them more competitive, right? They don't do things for energy efficiency purposes. They do things more in order to grow their businesses, because otherwise they have other issues that they need to deal with related to labor and other things. I think this is really something important to remember. So when we design our programs, we build it up from the firm level and aggregate demand to come up with some innovative solutions. We knew that in 10 years' time, Bangladesh will have a huge issue with water, and therefore we focus on desalination, combining it with the solar installations as well. On the technical side, again, when you do rooftop-mounted solar in Bangladesh, you need to take into consideration the building codes and also the regulations governing the sale of energy. And sometimes some things that we miss is yes.
Again, sorry to interrupt. I am notified that we have less time than I hoped for, so that's why I'm interrupting. And because it seems we have about 2 minutes left. So if that is really true, and it seems like it, then maybe, and sorry again, Etienne, then let me go quickly for a very quick statement on an example or on whatever you like from each of you that I can then maybe also take up in the takeaways. Nico, over to you.
I'll very quickly mention Inspira Farms, which is a company we've worked with, where they offer a kind of modular agricultural productivity offering, again on the smallest side of things in areas with very weak or no grids. And again, speaking to Ben mentioned cold chain, not exactly industrial, but on that side, there's a huge amount of opportunity. And we're seeing this kind of modular rollout, again, with standardized approach, which helps overcome some of the transaction cost issues. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nico. Rana,
I
please.
think, Mark, on this topic, I'll just pass it because, as I said, we're really too far from.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah,
Ben,
thanks.
over to you.
I'll name one which we're working on is Hyderabad Pharma City, which is taking all of the industrial SMEs on pharma out of Hyderabad and putting it into an industrial SEZ. And it's going through tender now, but it'll have India's largest district cooling and district heating networks. And the main areas we're giving support are on the ideas and sort of the capacity. But also a lot of support is needed to bring the kind of expert legal advisors, finance advisors, because the in-country consultancy expertise needs a slight boost on these sort of new technologies. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Ben. And while we have pushed our speed, we have received 6 minutes more. Great. So that means we will be able to hopefully tackle also the final question. My blood pressure is going back to a sort of normal level. But Bethany, over to you. On the example that I think you already mentioned, what was it, aggregated procurement, or any other that you feel is going to be
sure.
relevant
Thanks, Mark.
here?
So I guess one example that comes to mind immediately is again, in the corporate renewable energy procurement space for offsite, is the Vietnam direct power purchase agreement pilot, which is really a virtual arrangement, but that pilot was just issued for public comment, and I think it's really exciting, not just for Vietnam, which obviously has a really significant industrial base, but I think also regionally, like really hoping that it serves as a positive example regionally. And I think kudos to the USAID Vietnam Low Emission Energy Program that really spearheaded that effort. And then we've been working with them under the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator to support the private sector engagement piece of that. But I think that's one that comes to mind and that we hope to see replicated, or other versions of offsite procurement mechanisms globally.
Thanks, Bethany. There's so much information that I would like to really push further in terms of questions and more details. But with the time that we have left, what I feel is that the next question is on what is needed for scale up and increasing the speed. From what I gather, it seems there is, from all of you coming, the message, the soft side is so important, the awareness about the technology, about the reliability, the taking these policymakers by the hand in wanting to do a feasibility, in wanting to take a certain risk, in looking at different options. Is that right, that statement, or how should it be complemented and refined? Please, 30 seconds, 40 seconds intervention. Again, Etienne, starting with you, please.
30 seconds. I think the liberalization of the energy market is hinted across the board. So I think that needs to be done in addition to all the other things that have been already mentioned. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Etienne. Then over to Nico, please.
Appropriate kind of financing structures. Something that we work on a lot at Sunfunder is tailoring the right kind of asset financing, and that it goes, from working with those standardized contracts, getting the right security package, how to bring in other investors in a kind of scalable way. So it's not just about how much cash there is; it's what you do with it, kind of obviously. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nico. Over to
yes,
Jana,
I guess
please.
like to build on these two things and acceleration. The reality is we need legal regulator frameworks, and the example of Vietnam really shows it. The liberalization of the market. Finance is going to follow, but we clearly need to raise the ambition of policymakers. And I think that is something where we can be much more strategic on activating the right influencers on the governments. And we see with RE100, for instance, that the energy consuming private sector can be quite influential and push basically regulatory frameworks at the national level. I clearly think that these players can also play a role when it comes down the supply chain and bringing SMEs on board and doing capacity building part. And here again, when it comes to call for proposal or auctioning, etc. Accompanying the governments to link basically the energy supply developments to local value creation and job creation, workforce preparation, etc. Because otherwise we will not manage to mainstream these technologies and we'll stick to good example that we're looking for that are being shared. But the reality is we need to do this quickly everywhere.
Yeah. Thanks, Rana. Ben, over to you.
Thanks. I think I agree with everything everyone said already. I wanted to pick up what actually Gail had said in the plenary around this valley of death and the chicken and egg problem in these projects. One model which I think can work quite well is to have some kind of a national unit that's tasked with actually being able to identify these integrating opportunities and can actually back up with providing support to cities and industry, the kind of necessary upfront project development costs. Maybe it could be of a development bank. So we're working on that in India for district cooling, where you have that expert team. Because you can't have such dispersed knowledge in a country where this is all very new. I think concentrating the capacity and then bringing that capacity to different areas of the country can work quite well if it's backed up with a grant program. And also part of that, just kind of template TORs for what consultancy should be looking at. These are all parts of, should come as early stage aspects of the regulatory framework Rana mentioned, which I completely agree with. So thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Bethany, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So I think kind of going back to some of the themes that Rana and Ben and others mentioned around thermal, I think this is an area that just needs a ton of attention. Not that addressing, electricity requirements was easy, but I think the thermal solutions are going to be even more challenging, just given, some of the solutions are very site specific, all sorts of different types of energy requirements for industry. And I think maybe some potentially kind of near-term adverse effects when industry might be kind of competing with each other for near-term solutions. So I think that's an area where we really need to collaborate, and I think really work together to work with industry to provide solutions there.
All right. Wow, what a roller coaster. I think the plenary has already started, but let me just be very brief in thanking you all. I would have wanted to go on for a bit more, but hopefully we can do that at the next opportunity at the virtually, or who knows, maybe in person. Thanks a lot for all of your inputs, and I'll try to capture what we have discussed in the plenary. Thank you all.
Mark.
Thanks.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe even.
Hi, Aliki. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good. Welcome all to this breakout session. So I'm asked to moderate the session. So I'll be introducing myself first. I'm Aliki van Heek. I'm the unit head 3E analysis. 3E standing for economic, environmental, and energy at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And you might wonder, International Atomic Energy Agency, what are they doing here? So I'd like to take just a minute to explain a little bit. This session is about infrastructure development for driving low-carbon industrialization. So what does this mean? Making life easy for industries, attracting them to your country with proper low carbon infrastructure. And industries will need energy, both electricity and heat. And when converting to low carbon, only a few tastes are available. Hydro and geothermal, it's nice if you have it. Variable renewables, well, nice, but need complement. And then there's the sometimes forgotten one, nuclear energy. most well known from electricity production, large scale and so on, but also very suitable with newer innovative types for hydrogen production, for instance. Therefore, well placed to deliver its contribution to the infrastructure development for low carbon industrialization. That's why IEA is participating to this Vienna Energy Forum session. Just as a little bit of introduction of myself. Now, how to structure this session, maybe it's good to introduce ourselves quickly. First, we have already got an introduction of Mrs. Clintworth, Gil. So maybe we should start with you again if you want to add something specifically, or no?
No, you've got me.
Okay, good. Then I'll just go around my screen. Of course, we keep in mind everybody has received already our bios, but just to refresh the memory a bit, maybe Mr. Gamba, you can introduce yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniele Gamba, and I'm leading Transaustria Gasleitung. Transaustria Gasleitung is a transmission system operator here in Austria and owns gas transmission system consisting in 3 pipelines running through the border between Austria and Slovakia, delivering gas to the domestic market of Austria and to Slovenia, and above all to Italy at the cross border between Italy and Austria. We do operate, maintain, and own also 5 compressor stations with a total power install of roughly 450 megawatts. Yeah, this is briefly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gamba. Mr. Rattan?
Yeah, hello everybody, I'm Charlie Rattan. I was formerly with some big companies such as Shell, E.ON and SSE, but I always enjoy training, and that's what I spend the bulk of my time doing these days. So I train the world's hydrogen leaders, train on wind and hydrogen, ammonia, methanol increasingly, and carbon capture and storage. So there's a lot of interest in decarbonisation around the UK. We have 8 clusters. I was interested to see Gail Clintworth talk about ports and refineries and clustering. It's a principle very much in the forefront politically here in the UK. There's an awful lot of people want to know about how to engage with the low carbon, sustainable, circular and hydrogen economies. I help on that. And a route to the market for small and medium enterprises, often forgotten when big utilities talk to each other. But there's the workhorse of the UK economy is small and medium enterprises, and how they can prepare to become part of the circular hydrogen and perhaps the 4th industrial revolution here in the UK and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. So Mr. Kiss.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's excellent. Well, for the first introduction, probably nobody knows who is RAG, and RAG Austria is a rather small company. Probably Mr. Gamba knows us, and we are dealing with underground gas storages. And we are very small, but we have a very, very big impact in Austria because we are operating 70 terawatt hours of gas storages with a standard capacity of 30 gigawatts. And what we provide is security of supply. And that comes to my personal background, that I'm heading all our business development activities. And especially we are very, very active in research and development of underground gas storages for hydrogen, because the hydrogen is the backbone of the new industry, and it is clear that security of supply is very, very key in the new world of, let's say, sustainable industries, because you need 24 hours, 365 days a year energy, which is coming mostly from renewables, but they are not predictable. more or less, and for sure in the northern hemisphere or in the southern hemisphere, we have winter and summer, and that has to be balanced, and that is our goal, that we develop the solutions for underground gas storages to balance the overall system. That's RAG Austria, and I'm happy to be here and to discuss some issues, how to, what is the backbone of the industries for the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kiss. So now we go to our last one. Oh, you didn't complete yet? Sorry.
It's perfect for me.
Okay, good. So now our last participant, Mr. Ramdari. I hope I pronounce it well.
Yes, thank you, Aliki. I'm Sashi Ramdari. I'm representing the National Cleaner Production Center, and specifically the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project. The Industrial Energy Efficiency Project was the recipient of the International Energy Award last year. So we like to think that we're doing something right here down in South Africa, and we're having a great impact on industry. So our primary aim is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in industry, and we do this through resource efficiency and cleaner production assessments. In the last few years, we've managed to save South African industry approximately 5.7 terawatt hours. So it's a tremendous saving, and looking forward to the engagement and sharing some of our perspectives that we're experiencing currently here in South Africa with industry. Thank you, Aliki.
Okay, thank you, Sachet. So just to be clear about, this is about country voices, so about which country you're speaking from. Gail, which country you're speaking from? It was not quite clear to me.
So for this purpose, I'm going to speak from Kenya.
I see, okay. So we have two from Austria, and Charlie is from UK, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, good. So we have been given, I think you have all read it in the email, a number of questions to help guiding the discussions. So you've been reading them, but I will just keep bring them back into mind. The first one was, what is needed to establish the necessary physical, digital, and socio-economic infrastructure required to enable industrialization that is resilient, competitive, and low carbon? Second one, what have been some of the successes and failures of national programs deploying low carbon infrastructure in various countries? And third one, what are the emerging opportunities and how can we leverage past experiences to advance faster towards achieving the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? So I've been receiving some messages from you already to which questions you would like to address. Only from Gail, I didn't receive yet. Do you have any preference for questions? Okay. So the other four all would like to address the question one. And then Sachet, Daniela, and Charlie wanted to address the question three. So there was no one else for question two. So Gail, if you could say something about that, that would be great. So we have half an hour about for the rest of this discussion. So then I would just start with the first question and with a first addressing of this. Maybe Sachet can start about the first question.
Certainly. South Africa's vision for development is largely premised on resolving the nation's historical scars expressed by what we like to call the triple scourge: poverty, unemployment, and inequality. According to the new UN report, countries in Africa are trailing considerably behind developed markets in the share of digital infrastructure. This is a trajectory that is likely to continue fueling a global digital divide. According to a McKinsey study that was performed on African countries, currently an average spend of about 1.1% of our GDP is spent on investment and going digital, while developed countries compare by 3.2%. So a large divide in that sense. Infrastructure is indeed a cornerstone of our modern society, especially here in South Africa, and consisting of a grid-like network of roads, rail, water supply, electrical grids, the built environment, and digital networks. In the past, we talked of analog infrastructure in terms of roads, street lights, etc. But today we speak of digital infrastructure, future infrastructure that is software-based, data-enabled, and really has cloud access. Going forward, some issues that require change specifically include radical innovation to deliver the required speed in enacting legislation, which enables extraction of maximum economic and societal value communities, a restructuring of resources to eliminate duplication in infrastructure and resources. Examples include the networks owned by state-owned companies. So try not to reinvent the wheel. Use what we have and has been working well in the country. A restructuring of ICT governance bodies to better align with the trends in technology. An example of this is reducing differences between broadcasting and internet services. As we all know, South Africa is still largely a coal-powered energy economy. Load shedding is still a tremendous problem in our country. And from 2018, we've seen persistent load shedding within the country that has led to significant loss of income in our country. So aligning this to the National Development Plan, we're still very much a coal-based power economy. So the actions we're looking at in the short term still require really ensuring domestic security of coal supply to existing power stations, investing in heavy haul rail and corridor, especially within the Waterberg coal fields in South Africa, and a mention of gas, enabling exploratory drilling to identify economically recoverable coal and seam gas shale reserves, and this extends to the Waterberg area as well. Lastly, I'd like to touch on the electricity, and we've seen a move to less carbon and electricity production through at least 20,000 megawatts of renewable energy, which we aim to achieve by 2030. And really, as a last point, I'd like to mention revising our national electrification plan to ensure 90% grid access of consumers by 2030. Thanks, Ricky.
Okay, thank you, Sachet. That was a beautiful story about South Africa. So let's move now to Daniele Gamba.
Yeah, sure. I would bring the perspective of regulated business. So in the regulated business in which we do operate as a transmission system operator, I think is a clear, stable, and fair regulatory framework is the key element for developing a resilient and competitive and low carbon economy. If we look back to the last 10-15 years in Austria, but in Europe, I would say, I think we have achieved as DSOs remarkable results and achievements in terms of resilience, so means security of supply, transparency, but also competition. And this was due to the fact that we apply and we develop the system according to the several gas directive, but also the adoption of European network codes. So with the same rules regarding the interoperability, the tariff structure, but also how to deal with the capacity products and so on. So I would say that with the right incentive and the clear legal and regulatory framework, the same could be achieved also for enabling a low carbon industrialization. So the gas target model could be taken as a reference also for building up the green gas market. When I say green gases, I mean biogas, but above all, hydrogen. Hydrogen is, I would say, at the top of the agenda of many policymakers, because is the key element, according to our perspective, to sustain, to couple the electricity grid together with the gas grid, and also to create and fostering the energy transition. Mr. Keys mentioned the backbone. Just yesterday, the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, we collaborate with, together with other 20 TSOs in Europe, across Europe. 23, we are all together coming from 21 European countries. Yesterday we have released our update on the vision regarding the utilization of the existing gas infrastructure. This is a key element for fostering this transition. And you might download this report. This is public and very interesting, because I do think that there is many interesting topics because one of the most interesting achievement is that by 2040, the extension of the network via, let me say, retrofitting and repurposing could reach the extension of 40,000 kilometers. And it is very remarkable, because scaling up the hydrogen from a low percentage up to 10%, 20% could really help and foster this transition.
Thank you. Small question from my side. So with you're talking about hydrogen, but you're in a gas transmission company. Do you kind of mix hydrogen to the natural gas? And if yes, to what extent can this be done?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, we do think that at the beginning of this process that will require some years, we might blend the hydrogen into natural gas at a certain extent. We are currently making some assessment to see at which extent we might have this kind of mixture. I would mention a project pilot that has been done 1.5 years by SNAM. SNAM is the main Italian gas infrastructure company, and by the way, is also one of the 2 shareholders of TAG, and they made a pilot project injecting hydrogen up to 10% into the network in South Italy, feeding and delivering gas, a mixture of gas to end consumers. One was a pasta producer, and another was a mineral water producer, with very positive results. So just to give you some figures, if we replace 10% of natural gas into our pipeline with hydrogen, no matter if it is green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, we might save immediately up to 1.5 million ton of CO2 equivalent per year. That, just to give you a rough figures, is like the total emissions of a region like Burgenland here in Austria.
Okay, thank you.
So we have to take action.
Yeah, thank you for this addition. So let's move from the transmission company to the RAG. Mr. Kiss, can you explain again what is RAG standing for, and then address the first question? You're muted. You're still muted. Can take a second. Please say something again. You're still muted. Okay, say something again. No? Okay, maybe you can try to unmute yourself. And in the meantime, I go to Charlie. Yeah.
Yes, I was very interested in my fellow participants' remarks, and I don't want to repeat themselves. But I spoke with Tarek, I think, in autumn last year, and at the top of the list were regulatory changes. The regulations in the UK are not really fit for a hydrogen economy, which has been mentioned a number of times here. And things are changing, but it's changing slowly. There are various task forces and so forth looking at the safety cases. They're looking to ensure that natural gas alone doesn't monopolise the gas grid. So that's number one thing, to make sure that that's not forgotten. Number two, we need to make sure that the real life projects such as at Winlayton and Gateshead, with a real world injection of 20% of hydrogen into the gas network, is successful. See what problems emerge, if any, what learnings occur. And then we can look at perhaps stage 3 of a high deploy rollout, and that's a regional cluster. We've talked a lot about clusters. There are good reasons for clusters. The distribution costs are lower. The off-takers for a project might already be in place. There's a big clamour from industrial off-takers here in the UK. We're in a good place. The gas grid is good. The electric grid is also good and decarbonising. So we've got a good solid basis for it. But then we really need to try to see whether the theory, which is fine, works in practice. Certainly on hydrogen, you need to think about stakeholders. It doesn't take long before pictures of the Hindenburg reappear. They appear in just about every public engagement that I've been on. So you must be aware of that. And whether we think it may or may not be relevant, it's what stakeholders on the ground think that might guide us going forward. So we need to take them along with us. Building upon what Danny earlier said, I think there is an interface between the two grids emerging. I think some strategically sited, perhaps 1 gigawatt scale electrolyzers are key pinch points on the gas and electric grids. So that might be looking where. Would you look for a port? Would you look for an industrial cluster? Would you look for an interface between the gas and electric grids, or all of 3 of those? Those would be really smart. We've also got what you might call mega projects here in the UK, and indeed our European friends. They've got some fabulous names like Gigastack and Poseidon and Dolphin. I wish I could think of these names. But these are built in phases, these mega projects. And we need to make sure that the momentum is kept, that the lessons are learned from them. A lot of this is quite new, that people don't become discouraged with early setbacks. It's not going to be a linear process. There might be problems. We don't know yet. Hydrogen certainly has got a different molecular structure. You can't see it burning. There's a few issues around how to handle it. And we need to make sure that we're comfortable with that. If that works, and the regional cluster works, then it can go exponential. I feel that 8 big clusters in the UK, perhaps 3 or 4 of them might gain additional funding. There's been £170 million awarded to them last 2 weeks, which is good. It's more than seed funding, but it's certainly not enough for build out. So we can think about how we go from 1 cluster build out to a national deployment, and that will need funding. So there's an argument, where is that going to come from? Who's going to pay? How? It's all being bit parked at the moment as how the funding, it will be socialised in some way, and obviously the public will be paying it some way, but it's not really part of the main discourse at the moment. So that needs funding. But the trajectory is good here in the UK, certainly listening to some of the problems faced elsewhere. I think the problems we face is how to use what we already have in a smart way. How can we reuse? How can we repurpose? How can we avoid decommissioning costs? Can we use circular principles? What about corporate social responsibility? The way that we're going to build this new economy is almost as important as the economy itself. And for some of the new stakeholders involved in renewables, oil and gas companies, there might be a few lessons to learn from the utilities that have been doing this for 15, 20 years. So it's a very exciting prospect, but I think it's a case of using what we have smarter, refining it with a good basis. So it's an optimistic report from me in the UK, but there's still a few hurdles to overcome, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlie. So I see the muted sign with Siegfried Kiss has disappeared. So could you please try again?
I hope everybody works fine now.
Yes, it works.
Perfect. Sorry for the technical problems, but it's not in my sphere. Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. You gave me the word of backbone. And yes, yesterday it was published, and it was very, very nice that also gas storages are part of the backbone. It's not also a part of the backbone, it's the key element to be part of the backbone as it is now in natural gas system. And for that, we have to be sure that in future, hydrogen or the overall backbone has to be hydrogen fit. And hydrogen fit means, first of all, technically, and on the other hand, also economically. And last but not least, we have to address the issue that hydrogen has, in the volumetric sense, only 1/3 of the energy density. And that means if you want to address security of supply, because every gas storage in Europe and all over the world, there are almost 700 gas storages are needed for security of supply. And there are a lot of numbers around, but overall, there are estimates that the world demand of hydrogen is almost in values of energy the same a range of natural gas in these days. So what does it mean? We need, for security of supply reasons, with gas storages, you need three times the volume. And nobody addresses that for, let's say, and for the next years. It's not a project which we can overlook in 5 years. It's a very long time process to make the overall logistics feasible. I mean, transport is one, storage and security of supply. This is tremendously needed to say that for industry, for residents, it is necessary to have security of supply. That's the reason why we do foresee a very, very clear issue that means the concept of power to gas. We have to address much more the storage part, because this is the balancing part for the source on the one hand side and the demand on the other hand side. Because what we have to know is that from the price perspective of hydrogen, there is for sure a very tremendous price part. It's the logistics coming from the source to the demand side. And for that, especially in Europe, and I'm not talking only now for Austria and for Europe, we have to be very sure where the hydrogen comes from. As a storage provider, we are colorblind. We don't care. For us, it's a technical issue. Hydrogen has to be stored and withdrawn when it is needed. But where does the hydrogen comes from? In Europe, it's almost impossible to produce the needed hydrogen in 2050 for a resilient economy from inside Europe. And then we have to be sure, where does the logistics come from? Does it from Australia or from Chile or from somewhere abroad or from the neighboring countries? And for that, I have to mention a project or a neighbor like Ukraine. Ukraine is pretty near to or it's a neighboring country to the EU, and an infrastructure containing with gas pipelines are already in place. So it's a continuous process to bring hydrogen from these parts of the world, from these parts of Europe, from these parts, from neighboring parts, to the industry and to the residents. And from my perspective, we have to address all over the world the issue of storing hydrogen or the energy carrier for security of supply, to have it available when it is probably cold or warm, because nobody knows when it is needed most, but it has to be there in the market already, because otherwise we are running out of energy tremendously, because renewables can't bring the security of supply 365 days a year. And this is very short from my side, and I think it was also covered all the three questions, because the SDG is affordable, is one of the SDGs we have to address, and affordable means you have to also store the cheaper and logistics cheaper hydrogen.
May I reply? Or
yeah, sure. Discussion is encouraged.
Maybe Gail. Sorry for that. Just few quick remarks. So first of all, yes, storage is the key element that distinguish the gas grid comparing to the electricity grid. So the electricity grid has still a technical and economical barrier, and it is related to the storage of energy. So for that reason, hydrogen could be the element that could link together the gas grid, so the electricity grid with the gas grid. And in terms of security of supply, point is exactly that. So the gas infrastructure system could be considered as a reliable backbone, as we do not suffer the intermittence, the volatility of the production. That is the case for renewable, for instance, if we consider wind or solar power generation. Regarding cost, you are right. Today, green hydrogen might be perceived as a highly cost-intensive production. But if we look back, how was the cost 10 years ago? It was roughly 24 euro per kilogram of hydrogen produced. 6 years ago was 8. Today is 5.5 euro per kilogram. And the perspective, if we leave innovation and technology go further in this direction, many analyses foreseen to reach down to 1 euro per kilogram of hydrogen produced. Yeah, obviously we have also to make some tests on materials and on steel in order to see which kind of adaptations or adaptation of our infrastructure we do need. But according to some analysis, building up a completely new infrastructure has a huge cost comparing to retrofitting or to adjust the existing infrastructure. For that reason, economic aspect has to be considered for fostering this transition and to solve what Gail said, the chicken and egg problem. So that in this case, we do see in favor the sandbox project that some authorities put in place.
Thank you, Daniele. So now, Gail, if you would like to contribute something as well to this discussion. You're still muted. Yeah. No, very well. Thank you.
That's great, Alikis. You know, a lot of the conversation is obviously centering around Europe, right? For obvious reasons. So that's great. I guess I'd like to just bring a perspective to kind of the global issue, the global problem, right? So I'm not going to be technical here, but the global problem is that we've got, the developed parts of the world, largely US, Europe, and increasingly China, that have had a glorious opportunity to develop and now need to transition to low carbon. Then you've got a massive part of the world, right, which is Africa, Latin America, and India, and some of Southeast Asia, that still want to develop, right? Yeah. And how are they going to do that, right? So, it's wonderful having the conversation around hydrogen storage, but I'm sitting in countries where you've got 70% that have no electricity whatsoever, right? And they are going to want electricity. So what are they using at the moment? At the moment, they're using kerosene, they're using wood from the forests that they cut down. Where they can, they're using some kind of grid connection, which is largely to fossil fuel. And then, to run their businesses, because, and Sachet, South Africa is, it's a wonderful example, but it's also a wonderful example of, it's great when you've got a national policy, but when it doesn't work, there's a problem, right? So in many of our African countries, we have a situation where people just have diesel generators backed up left, right, and center, because that's the only way they can have any security of energy. So I guess what, I'm not going to talk specifically for Kenya. I'm going to talk about many countries in developing markets, right? Have a situation where either they are largely dependent on fossil, hydro, or hopefully geothermal for some of their base grid. But the grids are really, really not generally very reliable anyway. So if we are going to, and I'll take Africa for a point, so if we are going to provide electricity to what will be 4 billion people, 4 billion people by 2050, we're going to have to come up with some other ideas, right? And that is why with the Shell Foundation, we're working on the concept of microgrids. So how can you have microgrids that can provide these kinds of solutions linked to a renewable source, whether it is solar, whether it is some kind of hydro? I don't know where the hydrogen opportunities around there. I don't know enough about it, right? The second is where these industrial clusters come in. Because if you can make sure that industrial clusters, and I'm going to use the example of so many of our multinational companies who are operating operations in other parts of the world, right? In those other parts of the world where they are in industrial cluster, those industrial clusters are not renewable captive power systems by any means, right? They are either dependent on a fossil fuel grid, or in fact, they might be even more destructive than that. So a really simple request would be for every single business that is operating out of a developed country to look at where they're operating in a developing country and see what they're doing to transition. I'm a business person, so I'm pretty practical, right? So, I mean, if every single Toyota plant, if every single Volkswagen plant, if every single Shell facility actually implement some kind of transition, you're already beginning to change the world. So that's a second. And then the third point that I think has to be made is funding. Right. So, the poor parts of the world just can't afford to drive this transition. They can't afford to drive this transition. So I know there's all sorts of discussions around the just transition and how one, should subsidize the just transition. Is it likely to happen? I don't know. I mean, it's been bad. It's been hard enough just to get a Paris Agreement, never mind who's going to fund it. So, I'm not kind of holding my breath for the developing world to be bailed out, quite frankly, by the world that's, I'm going to say, created the problem. I am suggesting that we need to look at bespoke solutions for every sector and every country, but where it applies locally, right? So our big risk at the moment, and I talk now to those of you that are in convening forums, our big risk at the moment that is a lot of this conversation is taking place at a global level, which is quite far away from the reality of what's happening. And the simple solutions that are, and they're not simple, the solutions that are needed locally, so in local authorities, in local businesses, just aren't taken into account, because it's very easy to say net zero, etc., but it's the implementation of these solutions that is critical. So yeah, that's my, I guess, comment and ask.
May I probably add, I fully understand what you were talking about, and we agree. We learned the lessons from 50 years ago, and one issue I have always to mention all over the world, this is not only valid for Europe, is if you want to industrialize a country, you have to be sure the security of supply is solved. And if you want to have a low carbon industry, then it's even more tremendous because of the volatile electricity production. You can't predict during night, during wind, during low season, and you need also in developed countries. That is the only thing I wanted to highlight and mention this short breakout session, that security of supply is very, very important for all countries.
True. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Siegfried, for this addition. So we have 3 minutes left, and so I would suggest 1 minute for Charlie.
Yeah, okay. Well, try and turn my attention to the opportunities. It's been done here in the UK. We had no oil and gas industry in the 1960s. And within 10 years or so, we had a supply chain, we had a developed oil and gas industry, we had clusters, we had multinationals. So it can be done if there is political will, if it's across parties, and there's a desire to see it through. It's not going to be a linear process, but I think the regulations will be sorted sooner rather than later. What we really need now is shovels in the ground. Perhaps the early adopters will be the clusters. I would expect them to be near refineries, near ports. I'd also expect them to be near places with economic distress. So there are regeneration opportunities away from the financial centres that benefit perhaps fishing communities, communities that may have relied on the military, but with good renewable resources as well. I'm thinking places like Hull, Grimsby, Barrow-upon-Furness in the UK. But it's a positive picture in the UK. It seems to have pretty much all party support and buy-in, with that proviso that who pays has been largely parked and will need to be addressed sooner rather than later, albeit we are in a pandemic, post-pandemic environment, and things like that seem to have been pushed to the side. But it's an optimistic picture from here in the UK, and we do aspire to be world leaders or a world leader in the hydrogen economy as well.
Okay, thank you. Final minute for Sachet.
Sorry, can I just ask Charlie one question? Charlie, are you engaged in the Freeport discussion?
Yeah, tangentially, yeah.
Okay.
Tangentially.
Because that's a big opportunity, right? I mean, if you look at where they all are.
Yeah, I think there's a big overlap between some of the clusters and the Freeport discussions for sure.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Okay, thank you. So Sachet, maybe final remark?
Vicky, just testing if you can hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, if I can just share some sentiment. We've been dealing with security of supply issue, and industry has really paid the price over the last few years, and we've reached a stage where it's stopped. It's not so much a focus on a top-down approach. So what we found is that industry is not waiting for government. We're not waiting for that security of supply. We're not waiting for policy. A lot of industries in taking the step towards renewables, energy efficient operations, doing solar thermal, putting in large scale PV. So it's not happening throughout the industry, and a lot of industry is battling with it due to the security of supply. But what we find is that realize potential that exists was open. That's really where really good pockets of excellence are happening, and the move is taking. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, I just learned we got 5 additional minutes. So, so any other remarks? Maybe Gail?
Well, no, I was just going to say to Sasha, so I mean, that's the beauty, isn't it? And that, I think, also comes to the point of, you know, it's important to have an overall country energy policy, right? But the implementation of that happens through businesses, through local authorities, and so, you know,
bottom up, huh?
Bottom up. The bright light for Eskom's dilemmas, right, is that actually communities have taken it into their own hands, right? And you know, probably the big learning was it took too long to allow people to sell back into the grid, but you know, that's being needed now. So so that's great, actually.
Yes. Okay. So Daniele, still another remark?
Yeah, yes, thank you. I pick one point from Gail intervention that we do for sure have global target, but sometimes or most of the times with local solution, and there is no one fit for all. This is clear, and so what I would like to highlight is a technology neutral approach. So to leave research and innovation to go ahead, and obviously in this case each country might find the most suitable solution. I would mention just one final point in regards of sustainable development goals. And yeah, Gail, you are right. We have been talking about Europe, but there is also big opportunity coming from energy transition and post-pandemic recovery, for instance, for letting some areas like North Africa to collaborate with Europe in terms of, for instance, for renewable sources in that case. So as there is quite an abundance of wind, solar, and land. So I do see a big challenge, but at the same time also a big opportunity.
Great.
For many countries.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Final remark from Siegfried.
Yes, thank you very much for the last minute. I would summarize and say more renewables and much more renewables means tremendously more of storage capacities. And this is the key message I want to conclude, and let it with let's say with my name, keep it short and simple. Kiss.
Okay. Yes, I knew that already. Okay, then I would like to thank you all very much, and I think for this very interesting discussion with very interesting remarks. I will try to extract the main takeaways. So I would just suggest let's just leave this session and go back to the main session, and then we see each other there.
Okay, I see that the numbers are picking up and back to a full plenary. So while Mark gets ready to join, let's just get some summary from the output of the conversations. I would like to start with you, Aliki, if you don't mind bringing the country voices. I was there in the session, and there was a lot of interesting back and forth discussion on the hydrogen as a vector for addressing the infrastructure challenges. I see Mark now joining in. But yeah, we'll take it from you, Aliki. Key takeaways that we can sort of bring to the plenary.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, that is very hard to bring key takeaways, because there were so many elements brought up. They were quite interesting. Well, as an overall, interesting was that there was a kind of I say a split between a Europe-centered discussion, which was useful and discussing, and then there was a developing countries perspective, which was so totally different then. And so to start with the European-centered one, and it's infrastructure is the cornerstone of the development. We started with in the early days about roads, traffic lights, these kind of things. But now, of course, we're looking at more digitalization and networks, broadcasting, these things. Then, the gas model. We have a beautiful gas network in Europe, but now it's in the framework of decarbonization, going to be green gas. Hydrogen will be mixed to it, and then there's this little technical detail: hydrogen takes 3 times the volume of compared to natural gas. Then we have this wish for renewable energy, variable new renewable energy. This means more renewable energy. It means much, much more storage, and the storage part just needs much more attention. Then we have this perspective of developing countries with a totally different discussion. 70% of the users is still to be connected, needs access. Grids are really unreliable, therefore a development of microgrids. Also, often diesel generation is just often the only possibility of having electricity generation at all. And then funding is the issue in this part of the world. Most developing countries just simply cannot fund the transition, so funding has to come from somewhere else. When wrapping up, for industrialization in general, whether in developing or developed countries, security of supply needs to be solved. So also when talking about this decarbonization, we are introducing an unreliable variable energy source. Also in developing countries, this needs to have the proper attention. And one of our participants was named Kees was from his last name, and explained this as keep it simple and stupid as the last recommendation. So
thank you
from my side.
Thank you, Aliki, and thank you for bringing the nuances to the diversity of the perspectives on industrialized versus industrializing countries, and the difference in needs in terms of tackling the infrastructure, the transition in the infrastructure elements, particularly energy supply and logistics, etc. So, taking it to the global perspective from Mark, I also managed to attend part of the discussion. It looked like you needed more time, and it was even richer than I can imagine. So back to you, Mark, for some key takeaway.
Thank you, Tarek. And as you say, I was lucky enough to be in a very exciting panel, to the extent that I got a bit carried away and lost time control out of sight, and really extremely good insights and examples. And I'll do my best to capture what was said. The opportunity is huge. Solar PV in emerging economies is so dynamic as a market right now, but not just power, also waste heat. There was an example of free cooling that was mentioned. So high temperature heat from can then be used downstream. So opportunity is huge. The barriers, what was interesting and a little bit surprising was that many of the panelists brought up the importance of the soft side of it, the awareness, the capacity, the knowledge of local players in terms of also what the maturity and reliability of the technologies right now. And that is so important, that continues to take local, national players, the policymakers, who are the ones who have to authorize a feasibility into a low carbon option, or who have to look at often complex solutions like district heating or totally new networks that are required to facilitate the energy transition. So this soft element is extremely important. That was remarkable. Of course, then financing needs to come as well, but is typically there. Will follow is the finance will follow is how one panelist put it. But at the same time, the proper financial solution also needs to be provided, and that sometimes needs pioneering work, needs creative work. There was one example from Nigeria provided by Sun Funder by Nico on how very standardized solutions were offered as a way to also address sometimes the challenge of size. What do you do with, because if you have a large industrial park with for a megawatt solar PV system, that's great. You will find financiers, but what with much smaller sizes? How do you tackle that? And there is innovation going on. There are solutions for that. So very interesting to see. And there was also from Bethany an example of aggregated procurement to again address this challenge of size. And all of these examples, all of this knowledge and approaches also shows that our convening, our exchange, our collaboration is important to disseminate this kind of good practices, of innovative ideas to help the acceleration and the scale up. And that is, I guess, part of our job as development community. And sorry, I'll have to add a few more things on sort of the larger picture that are also important: liberalizing power markets, the legal and regulatory framework that needs to be conducive, which are of course also elements to take into account. But overall, a very, very rich discussion, and we could have gone on for another hour, I think. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think rightly put. I mean, the time is of the essence in terms of tackling this dimension. I mean, we know for a fact that many of our member states, especially the developing countries, are aspiring to increase the share of manufacturing value addition. So industrialization is on a growth path, but this is the opportunity. This is the time to make sure that the infrastructure for future industrialization is put on the right direction through looking at all the possible options for a more resilient, sustainable, and low carbon infrastructure, as we're looking for investments that can go in the range of 20, 30, even 50 years. So this is also an opportunity, but of course the conversations I've been hearing both in both breakout sessions and as alluded to is of course the cost of the transition, how to make it affordable, the issue of reliability and security of supplies. Industry needs a reliable, secure, and affordable energy and other services, logistics and infrastructure, communication infrastructure. So this is also comes into on top of all these challenges. And I think a key message is that also how do we provide the tools and the solutions to policymakers and developers where they can sort of direct the opportunities in the right direction. So it's if not even encouraging, but nudging and also facilitating the needed awareness toward these opportunities. I also want to bring and highlight a message also I heard. I mean, Gail mentioned that there's a large part of the world that still wants to develop. And so it's not only a transition, but to develop. And so how do you create the conditions for that development to be low carbon? It's a question of of equity and finding the kind of creative solutions that allow us to finance and invest. With this note, I mean, I think there is, we will produce a summary of the session and we will share it with all the participants. It was a rich discussion, and I think it's as I said, policymakers are crying for guidance, for ideas, and there's a lot of thoughts from the conversation in both sessions to synthesize for further actions. I want to take the opportunity to thank all the contributing panelists for the conversation, and the moderators Aliki and Mark, and the VEF team for supporting this whole process. I invite you for our next round of virtual series, which will happen in May. Will be also in May. We will be the concluding part of the virtual series. With this, if there is no further questions, I think we've reached the limit of the session. I take few notes. I also allude to a few observations or comments from Rana in the chat and Danielle. So thank you all. Thank you very much. So this is conclude our session, and looking forward to see you on the next Vienna Energy Forum virtual series in May.